So basically, what I was thinking is that you could build video games like choose your own adventure, kind of this type of books or video games that really harness the power of the LLM to actually drive the game. And and then there's certain UIs for, I don't know, like creating your character or choosing between different paths in a visual way. I don't know, whatever it is. But I
Yeah.
think that that could be a really cool experience for the
The
video
thing
games.
for me is though, I mean, and I think if it's just within your own game, right, then there is no difference in it being a separate application. I think, if you could, I don't know, connect your LinkedIn and pull out 10 of your friends, and then from that it generated a guess who, right? That's where you start to see new behaviors coming from, because you're using the fact the LM has the ability to connect these different things, and it's creating something new that's not but different. But like, even that you could potentially do separately. It's like, where do you need? I think the thing to really make these MCP apps fly is where you need to have that model LM glue between things that isn't normally there, and it has to process stuff and do something unusual. I mean, you could kind of and have it so that, because otherwise you could just replicate it in a single application. Or I mean,
Mm.
maybe it's harder to do, but that's where I think you can really differentiate it from an existing product. If it was just playing choose your own adventure with a model, you could just build an app where it calls the model to generate that. You're
Yeah.
not really leveraging that sort of ecosystem of all the other MCPs. The really good examples for me is like Escalador. Its ability to pull the data and all the LM to control it and pull in data for other things is where it becomes really useful. It's much more, I think, around having these small pieces that can hook into other things that make it really interesting. From my perspective, I mean, what do I know, right? It's like these things. It's hard to know what's really going to fly, but I think to really show off MCP apps, you've got to have something that leverages that sort of ecosystem.
I could see, of course, I don't know what the. Well, actually, can you tell me more about like what the game was that was being promoted? Because I can see how gamification fits quite nicely with what Toby's talking about, but maybe a little more about like what you saw from the presentation.
I think, well, I mean, the one I remember that they've done a bunch of games. So Alpic has done a bunch of games because they see really gaming as a really interesting thing for MCP apps, which is fair. I think the one that I've seen is like a Cluedo game where you have a bunch of your friends and you all like sign up, and then it signs one of you as the murderer. I don't know if it's Cluedo or sort of werewolf mafia style, but it kind of, and I think the idea is the model then lies about, yeah, as it could be a liar and it could make up stories, and so it does some really nice things, and I've done a bunch of these sorts of behaviors leveraging MCP apps, so it's much more visual than just being pure text. Um, but I don't know if you sort of have a concrete example of what it was, JC.
So I have, yeah, I was looking at the notes. Like there was also D&D. Um, then they had something like, well, lying and guessing games, which you said, murder mystery, um, smart NPCs. So I mean, I don't know where those components fit in the different games, but those are kind of the some of the things that they are building, right, with leveraging the LLM in a game.
Hmm. Well, right. It's funny you should put that way, JC, because I think that the Toby's Toby's thing is to always invert that turn of phrase, right? To talk about, you don't put the LLM in your app, you put your app in the LLM. And like when you just started talking about, putting the LLM in the game, the first thing I thought about was like doing Toby's flip. By the way, we should now trademark that. It should be
Sure.
Toby's flip. And it's a question like, how do we put the game in the LLM? And I think that's where things get exciting. 'Cause there was a game that was, I think a fairly stupid game that was like one of the early ChatGPT app examples that came out of OpenAI. I think that was in that presentation that you and I both went to, Toby. Back in January or something. And the
Okay. Oh, yeah,
and
yeah, yeah, yeah.
It was like, oh, it basically showed off how you could have a game in the widget, but it wasn't really showing off why this added value or why the LLM experience has value. It's intuitive to me that like a game, particularly like a D&D, which is basically a collaborative storytelling exercise, right, is actually a pretty good fit for working with an LLM. Also, LLMs right now are primarily single player experiences, right? It's
Mm.
you and the bot. There's an interesting exercise of using MCP apps to break out of that, right? How does it bring other people in? But that sort of has a cadence problem to it of like, kind of, I gotta wait for someone else to interact or whatever. But the other the thing I think is even more exciting is this idea like, okay, how do you put the game inside the LM? How can the game be part of whatever workflow I'm doing right now? That might make it more engaging or make me think about it differently, right? That could be relatively useful. Like the let's build a model, right, of this colleague who I'm trying to predict how they're going to behave, right? I can see MCP apps being useful, right? I can see the widget being useful for giving me the visual of the person or even the spoken avatar or whatever, right? That could be working with that. But even just like the game thing, all right, I've got this person. Let's presume they're an NPC in Dungeons and Dragons. What would they be? Let's portray them this way, right? What is the little, kind of, adventure game experience I can have, like going to the castle, with them, using the AI, of course, to be driving more of the storytelling part, because the AI does words, does that super, super well. I can see having even having speech or having, animation or having like this sort of the walking around, type thing, right? Of like, okay, what does a, classic JRPG type thing look like, right? That could give
Mhm.
you more of that. That might be an engaging or cause you to think differently. And that'd be one of the most important parts is it would be your game and your experience based on, and not even about just you, but about the context you're in right now, right? This is where you're bringing in your colleagues. This is where you're bringing in your competitors for working with this kind of thing. I can see those as being, games that really show off the Toby flip, right?
Yeah.
And I was thinking
It's
about before your meeting yesterday, Toby.
one of the things actually that made me think of that is that I've always wondered about this idea of kind of using like the computer layer to make boring things interesting. So you can almost imagine like this. You're just supposing I don't know. You have to write a bunch of boring emails to somebody, but maybe the LLM could act as a filter to make it more of an interesting challenge that kind of changes. Let's suppose you have to respond in a certain way, and it could kind of the emails could come in and they could change it so the text is like Old English or something. You have to respond in Old English and it reverts it back before you send it out. So it could basically, it kind of gives you a different lens for the tasks you have to do so that you're able to make it more engaging than the boring standard process you have to do. So, I mean, I guess, the idea I always had was, imagine, where's a good analogy for this? I don't know if you've seen that there's a video on, YouTube, sorry, no, on social media a little bit, where people are doing weightlifting, and with their glasses on, they're seeing like kittens being about to be chopped by a big blade, which they're holding up. So they have to hold it up to the weightlifting rather than killing the kids. And I wonder if there's a gamification of some of the tasks you have to do using the LLM to make it more to change the how it comes across, so it makes it more interesting to deal with than the sort of boring everyday things that you have to do. But yeah, it's I mean there's definitely an interesting thing in this, but it's I guess just trying to find the right angle to make it super work well.
Yeah, I think it can unlock so many things, and maybe we now can take a step back and introduce a bit of the context of where we heard about this cool idea of the game in the LLM. So basically, Toby and I were yesterday at a really cool event organized by Alpic. So Alpic,
And
they
us,
are.
we did it too. It wasn't just Outback.
Yeah. I wanted to introduce Alpic and then say and us. So
Yeah.
So yeah, so Alpic is like one of the biggest names right now in the MCP world. So they are a cloud platform that lets you go from idea to monitoring your MCP server, and they have a bunch of really cool tools to allow you to build MCP servers and MCP apps as well in an easy way. And then we co-hosted so Encore, Alpic, and Glovo. So Glovo, it's a Barcelona-based startup. They are on-demand delivery app, and it was really cool because they're also working on basically building their MCP server for specific use cases that we can also discuss. But yeah, so that was the event. There were presentations by Alpic, by Toby. He spoke really well about the main, like things that we're seeing, patterns, and how to think about the UX of building an MCP app. And yeah, so hopefully this gives a bit of a context, and now we can also maybe touch on some of the most interesting things that we heard in the conference. Toby, is there anything you would? Sorry, go ahead.
No, well, I mean, yeah, I was just going to sort of follow on from there. I think, if we look at across the different sort of main talks, what was interesting, I think, from the Glovo one, so just for context on this, Glovo is like a DoorDash, I guess, but in Europe. It's so they have this way of they do this sort of bet system of trying out things, and they have a bet of doing an MCP app to see what people wanted. What was interesting is what they chose. So, what Glovo delivers, they focus on like food, like cooked food. They focus on retail products, and they focus on groceries as being sort of the main sort of different sort of groups of things they do deliveries for. They decided that retail was the thing they wanted to use to start with, which surprised me because they're mostly well known for their food. But apparently the reason they focused on that one is because retail was the thing when they tested with users, it's the most likely product that they do comparisons with. So which followed on, it was the most likely product that people are in an LLM for. You don't normally go to an LLM and say, order me a burger. You go to an LLM to say, which headphones should I get? Which are the better headphones? And then, the idea of being is, okay, these are the headphones I want to get because they're the better ones. Click, Glovo, get me them. So that was the idea, which when I explained that, it kind of made sense. It's like, okay, I can see that now. I can see where you want to do it. I mean, I personally want for food ordering, but, I guess that's fair enough. But I think, and they said, I think they said there was an interesting stat. I think it was like 18, was it 18% of people, I think in retail are coming to them, are being sourced from ChatGPT. So it is a significant entry point into the Glovo product from people searching, how do I get this product? So, I think they definitely see it. And the reason why they did the bet is they saw it as being, this is where our audience is coming from. This is not something we can ignore. And which is why I led to the bet and them doing this. And I think, they're obviously going to get through the publishing process and get it in and get people using it. It was interesting to see. And they moved it pretty quickly. I mean, obviously with a large company, there's all sorts of compliance and stuff they have to get signed off. And it felt like that the majority of the work wasn't actually in the MCP server. It was in a lot of the discussions they had to have to security and, legal to make sure everything makes sense. So, I think they did the whole thing in about a month or so of work.
Well, but there was one thing that I found interesting in terms of the implementation, because they mentioned they face a challenge when so basically they're the way they did it, they are surfacing the whole catalog of products, right? And then they if you in traditional search, if you search for headphones, you could get like a headphone case or a headphone, like a USB cable or whatever it is. So it might not be exactly what your intent is. So that's in traditional search. So they had that challenge with when the LLM would just call a discovery or a search tool, and get everything. And most of those items were not relevant to that intent of the user in the conversation, because they were searching for headphones, not for a case. So what they did is they kind of put basically another LLM call in there in between. So you would get the catalog, and then the LLM would just filter those out to get the best matching result to the intent. So I think that was, I mean, I found that interesting because it just didn't rely on the tools plainly, but rather it again leveraged the LLM power to actually filter those results, right?
Yeah,
So
it felt like to me that they could do a bit better than that. I mean, surely they could just get the LLM to give a very specific description of what they need and make sure their search is not being super broad. I mean, I think that, I mean, it's first version. I mean, you can understand lots of things they would tweak, but I think there's ways you could get the LLM to help you narrow it down before you actually do the search in the first place, potentially. But yeah, I mean, it was pretty cool. I think it was interesting things that they did. Their office is amazing. It was a hell of an impressive AV setup for sure. Anyway, sorry. What else, JC, from that first one?
I think from Glovo, I think they also highlighted the importance of intent, which is something that you also talked about, and it's really important. So they basically focused and they started everything from the intent of the user. So again, the intent of the user was to get a recommendation on the best headphones or directly buy the headphones. So if you start with that intent, then it's really easy to kind of build the MCP app from there. So that's also something that they highlighted. Like they had product managers and also engineering manager there, and they both gave their different views. So from the product side and also from the technical side. So that was interesting to see, as that's something that we are always discussing about, right? And I think apart from that, on the global side, unless you have something else, I had basically noticed a lot of questions that were revolving basically around the same thing. So it was around discoverability, which we know is still an issue, and then something I found interesting around tracking the usage and having a proper analytics tool, right, to actually monitor what your users, what these users are doing, how the LLM is calling your app, when it's calling the tool and when it's not calling the tool, why. So there's a lot of questions around that I felt from the audience. So that, I mean, to me, that signals like there's still a lot of things to discover and to be done. Also on the server, on the client side, right? Like OpenAI, I don't think OpenAI has come up with the right solutions for this yet. Same with Claude and probably the rest of the players here. I don't think they have a good solution yet.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about discoverability is interesting. I mean, it's always an issue. I think, as you say, there was a lot of people talking about analytics, but I think that's going to be a challenge. I think a lot of people are coming into this thinking this is going to be treating this like websites where I've got these anonymous users. I can try and track anonymous behavior. If I can get them, find some way unique about them, I can track them across multiple sessions. And I think all this is going to be much harder with the LLMs. I think they're going to be very restrictive in terms of tracking users beyond across a session. So it's going to be much more about trying to get users to log in or finding some way to do that, because I think it's going to be a challenge. I think OpenAI will want to give some information, but my guess is that they're not going to want to give away too much, because there's a lot of that. I don't know. I mean, there's lots of unknowns around this. What was one of the things interesting is that Alpic said afterwards, I was talking to them, that the apps don't have a lot of focus in the frontier model companies right now. I think they've got other things that they're really focused on. So it's it's gaining traction with a lot of people. People are building more things, but it doesn't have it only has the users just yet. It's slow. It's a slow progress a little bit in terms of getting that user base going. So it needs some people to create some amazing apps to really unlock it. I think it's going to be one of the big things.
Yeah.
And then I guess the next session was mine, which, I mean, it's the usual stuff that we talk about, the framework. I did some tweaks to the framework when I was thinking about it, because obviously when you say it out loud a lot of times, you think about some things, and I did some tweaks around, splitting it out in terms of separating. Well, we've got the mission, and we've got the sort of the what the mission is, the why, and then the intent, interaction, and tools of the how. But I think the thing that seems to resonate most is the Toby flip. The thing that I think people have flagged that phrase, and I think, to my mind, that's one of the most important things that people need to think about this stuff. That's where you really unlock the value. I'm really going to try and think of trying to encourage more people to kind of unlock this, because actually, good point. That one of the things about the Glovo app, even the completed app, there were two things I noticed about it. One is that the demo didn't work. I don't think the tool call was done properly, and I think that's still a problem with MCP. The tools aren't always called when you need them to be. That's always been a problem. I think it's always getting better, but it's never perfect. And the other issue is their app. The transaction was done in the website, so you set everything up, very much like the Carrefour app. You get everything lined up in your shopping basket, but it's only until you actually log into the website can you do the transaction. So I do feel that misses, having to leave the conversation is obviously where you're gonna, it kind of breaks the flow a little bit. So that's something that probably people need to work on.
Yeah, for the that's also something that I noticed around about the demos. Like both of the demos that were showed there, they failed, right? So that speaks to the reliability of the MCP, either how you build it or design it, or the MCP protocol itself. I don't know, but the other thing that I found interesting was, so speaking to this unreliability, Alpic, they built this open source framework which is called Skybridge, which helps you basically build an MCP in just a couple of minutes. And they did a really cool demo of just giving a prompt to Claude, having this Skybridge framework as a skill, and then you would build the whole thing in just a couple of minutes, and it would get you like 90% there. So, I mean, you can see there are already like tools coming out where you can just like, you get most of the work done for you. So I think that will help more and more apps being built by developers. So that was really cool to see. And I think another.
I think. So you're on, Jesse.
I was going to mention that they also Alpic also spoke to the growing amount of Claude connectors, for example. It felt something I would mention here, but to them it feels like Claude is ramping up on the amount of MCP apps that they are getting onto the platform. They are presenting in a different way, as we also discussed previously, versus like ChatGPT apps. They are just connectors that are for more technical people, you might say. But they mentioned they have, I don't know, over, what was it, like over 200?
Yeah, it's
245 connectors. So yeah.
I think what they were saying to me was that the Claude is very much focused on B2B still. It doesn't really care about the consumers. And if you look at the connectors, it's all like, linear and Jira, and not really things like booking.com. But having said that, there was a ticket website in there. So there are people who are trying to get on both. What the other thing that's interesting, which I didn't know, was that Claude actually has discoverability. You don't, because it's got, I think it's done a better job of the sort of tool search. If you put things in, it will suggest tools you haven't actively added to your session, which obviously OpenAI doesn't have. So that is actually one of the benefits of going with Claude. Apparently, they obviously still have a submission process they're a bit picky on, but really, if you want discoverability, the Claude is actually the place it's actually happening right now. The only challenge is you don't have the audience that you do with OpenAI. So I guess that's one of the restrictions. The other thing with the Alpic, I mean, I think some of the things that I talked about in my session around, single focused mission, single one intent per tool was replicated in their presentation. I think there was a couple of things that they sort of said similar things. And I think that does seem to be the biggest problem with MCP apps and MCP general, is that it's what people put into this. And I do worry a little bit around, I think that some of the challenges of the tool calls not being used is because there's a degree of the intent not being clearly defined enough for the model to pick it out as being something that it should call as a tool. So I think there's definitely some agent experience as well as user experience that needs to be thought about to make sure that the tools get called at the right time. But the Alpic stuff, I mean, they've done a really good, it's a great product. I mean, I think that they've tried to really focus on the dev experience for the users. Obviously one of the challenges of building MCP apps is getting that feedback of, is it working in MCP? And so they have a lot of tools that help you test without having to install the MCP app and restart it all the time, which is pretty helpful. So I think it looks like it's a good SDK to help build things for sure. And they're doing a really good job of like evangelizing MCP. I mean, they're going all around the world to places, doing these sort of meets, trying to get people to think about MCP as a good target. So I mean, I think it's getting there, but it's just hasn't. We haven't quite had the unlock of a really successful app yet.
Well, we need to keep building cool apps and see what sticks.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's also something in here about the whole B2C versus B2B aspect. Because Claude is technically within the universe of Anthropic is considered their consumer app, to the point where actually it doesn't cross over all that well with, say, Claude Code. Because even though my Claude subscription comes with my subscription to Claude Code, like my Claude Max gives me access to Claude Code at the higher level of model usage, it still won't allow Claude Code to get access to like the chats that I've been having. Right, where I can do chats or work up a big idea, and I still got to do the stupid, copy and paste. There's like internal integration things that be doing that would drive a lot more value. But they see the world as, I think, largely in terms of productivity, right, instead of just time waste, right? And they don't want to be the place where you sort of hang out and get anesthetized, right? They don't want to be sort of the next drug. They want to be a source of productivity, or at least it seems like that's their play right now. And that tells me what kind of apps they are looking for. I think that gets reflected, right, in the apps that have been accepted, and also the kinds of experiences they're looking to solve for, right? And so they're being limited in the apps they accept, which means they're more willing to want to recommend them because they're going to be asking what can help make you more productive, right? Not something that's going to be like, hey, how can you waste time, or how can you, shove pizza in your body or something. And I think when we look at like what kinds of apps to build and like discoverability and like acceptance, a good fraction of this is, what do the platforms want to bring into their environments, right? And it's actually a little bit less clear to me what ChatGPT even wants right now, but it does seem clear to me that what Claude wants is a little bit closer to what like Microsoft Copilot want, which are things to help make you more productive. That's why the Excalibur really takes off. And also that kind of composability goes much better with a story of productivity than it goes with a story of time wasting, right? Or B2C commerce, or consumerism is actually that was the word I was reaching for. That we see in sort of the B2C side of it. And I think that by looking at the way, you can ask, okay, which platforms want which apps, and then that will tell you what kinds of things it's more likely to get accepted and drive up utilization, at least today.
The only thing I would add to that is that when I was speaking to Alpic, they were saying that there is one guy who does the App Store for Claude. This is one guy, which is a bit crazy for $800 billion. So I don't know if it's just that, whether it's that they actively don't want consumer apps, or they're just prioritizing B2B thing or productivity things, or that they just don't have enough time to deal with it. In fact, I think what Alpic said was there's one guy on the Claude Connector store. He's been allowed to recruit 2 more people, but that's limited because the hiring manager needs to hire another hiring manager because they're all so backed up. So it's a classic case of, I think, it just doesn't have the focus, I think, right now, the Claude Connector. I mean, it seems the frontier model companies are very much playing catch up. If somebody does something that really moves the needle, then the other one seems to try to do something similar. Obviously, through the lens of OpenAI, historically was focusing on sort of B2C, but it seems at the moment OpenAI is all in on codecs. And the stories I've heard is that the whole company is around trying to make the codecs experience better, and I think they're trying to make this isn't the current plan that they're building like a one ring kind of app that rules them all, where it does all of codecs and chat and everything in one place, trying to replicate your desktop. So, I think I think that there's an element of just not having focus on this at the moment for both of them, the companies. But yeah, I mean, again, I don't know. I mean, it might be that Claude actively doesn't want to have an app store littered with nonsense apps, so that kind of takes away its feeling of this is where I am to do business. I'm not here to play around. I'm here to, actually get stuff done. So I don't know. That's something I don't know. It would be interesting to talk to Claude people about it, actually, to figure out what they see, how they see things. But certainly, it seems that the publishing process. Well, I was going to talk about Alpic. The publishing process in Claude is a bit hit and miss. I think the words they use. It wasn't clear. I think the publishing process of OpenAI has got a bit better, and they've got a bit more organized about how they do it, so that more apps are coming through now, are being approved. Apparently the process now is down to about 2 weeks, so it's not so bad as it was at the beginning. But Claude apparently is still a bit hit and miss. So there was some interesting sort of facts that we got, sort of side conversations around how things are going right now. And then in terms of conversations we had around the edges of it, afterwards, I think the sort of general feeling I got was that people want to do things in MCP. I think there's a lot of questions around a lot of people. I think there's a big education of people trying just to put apps into the MCP, into the chat conversation. The big no, which is that I'm just going to stuff my app in there and job done. And I think that's going to be a constant battle, where people aren't really going to see the unlock where they do it with the one mission idea. A lot of questions, as we talked about, around analytics, and about sort of understanding of user behavior. Some questions around transactions. I think it was interesting. People wanted to know, how monetization is likely to work. And I think it's interesting because really, Alpic, who were very close to this, they didn't know either. They're saying, OpenAI's done some monetization work, got the instant checkout, which I think they've turned off. I think there's lots of experimentation going on. I don't think there's any monetization, as I remember, in the actual MCP app standard. There's no monetization built into that just yet. And I don't know if there's any plans to have it. So there's still lots of questions and not necessarily lots of answers to things. JC, in your conversations, was there anything that came out that was interesting for you after the talks?
I think I met a couple of people who were coming from, let's say, big companies or medium-sized companies, and they were either product managers or product people. They what was interesting to me is that they didn't know much about MCP in general. Like I think we've discussed this, but they knew, or they know, they have to somehow make use of MCP, this uh, buzzword, but they don't know how, or they don't know well, let alone like MCP apps or the MCP UI protocol. So it was interesting to me to hear about what they, like they were trying to look for ways to make the product available to LLMs, but they were not sure how. They seemed to be confused about, is this like building the SEO for LLMs, or this is something else? So a lot of medium-sized companies and big companies as well, they are coming to this kind of events for looking for, like some knowledge or answers to okay, what do we do now, like how do we think about this? And I think hearing first about Glovo and their experience in building the MCP, how they went from, okay, we know we need to do something with MCP, now what do we do? And then testing out this bed in like under 2 months. I think that's gonna be the kind of thing that it's gonna be interesting to product people in different companies. So that was kind of the line that I was seeing as I was talking to people after the talks.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people that don't really know about this stuff still, and particularly how to actually make the use of it. So I think one of the things we need to do on Core is to maybe update our website to talk about, offering sort of sessions to have workshops to kind of take them through the framework, mapping that onto their products to see where they could take missions out that could be wrapped into an MCP app for them. Because I think that's one of the biggest. I mean, that's always been the biggest challenges that we speak to people about. Building an MCP server is relatively quick, but actually working out what to build is really where the challenge comes, I think, for most people, at least for the moment.
Yeah, definitely.
The why and the what is harder than the how. We'll get together again and talk more about the developments in MCP in the next week.
Cool. All right.
Awesome.
Cool.
Nice talking to you guys.
Thank you guys. Bye.
Clear. Bye.